Welcome back to Profiteers vs. the People, the podcast where we tell you why most of the richest people in history have been big old smelly assholes. So this episode is going to start our series on the Sackler family, who are a case study in the effects of greed and generational wealth, as well as somewhat of an explanation as to why the pharmaceutical industry is so nefarious today.
Yeah.
This is going to be a lot to process. So we are going to eat the elephant one bite at a time. And today we are going to begin the story of the eldest patriarch of the Sackler family, Arthur, or Artie Sackler. Now, for many of our longtime listeners, you may have noticed that we have a trend of debunking profiteers who claim to be self-made. And for those of you who have been waiting for a story of someone actually coming from nothing and making something of themselves, this is it.
Yeah, not that Arthur Sackler would want it told that way, but that's what's happening. This is the story of why so much in American medicine sucks the way it does. And our main source, Empire of Pain, is some of the best writing I've encountered, but because Arthur Sackler was so damn secretive, there's going to be this whack-a-mole element to this story. Like, the first chapter here is going to be just everyone loving and being captivated by this hardworking and brilliant boy, young man, adult. And then we're going to assume this bizarre sort of rhythm where Arthur Sackler is nowhere and then, boom, he's there. It basically goes something like,
medical revolution happens, and it's actually kind of bad in a way.
Wouldn't you know it, Arthur Sackler secretly invented that, basically. He's been doing it for years, as it turns out.
Yeah, and as we discuss this, it's going to be enticing to look up spoilers. But do us a favor. We know that the name Arthur Sackler is going to ring funny in your ears, but if you don't already know the story, don't Google this one. There's a reason that Sackler sounds familiar, but it'll be way more fun if we kind of get to all of the meat of the story together.
Yes. Art Sackler comes from almost nothing and will buy his parents a grocery store upon graduating from college, put his kid brothers through college and medical school, end our reliance on shock therapy for the mentally ill, and eventually get rich by bringing real, tangible relief to a nation of suffering housewives, many of whom will come to worship the man's world-moving whims and opinions. I'm Rad Bill.
And I'm Money Mike.
And
Chapter 1. Everyone loves Artie Sackler.
So, the basics.
Arthur Sackler was born on August 22nd, 1913. He was born Abraham, but he moved away from that name because Jews weren't very loved in New York City when Arthur was born. His dad's name was Isaac, and Isaac and his brother opened a grocery store called Sackler Brothers at 83 Montrose Ave, Williamsburg. Arthur's mom's name was Sophie, and she wanted the kids to be doctors.
Mm-hmm.
Early in Artie's life, the family's fortunes were rising. They moved from Williamsburg to Flatbush, which at the time was a middle-class neighborhood, and this marked a relative achievement. They had made it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Isaac sold his grocery business to invest in some real estate. This was New York City, of course. Real estate in New York City never goes down. Until it does. So then they moved into a smaller dwelling, and Isaac opened a shoe store, or zapateria in Spanish. This also failed, and Art's dad had to take a job working at another grocery store. So he went from owning a grocery store and moving up in the world to working for somebody else's grocery store.
Apron to suit jacket to apron.
Well said. At home, his parents both, I believe, spoke Yiddish, and mom never really learned how to read in English. So if that kind of gives you an idea of this pre-Great Depression Jewish family. In 1925, Arthur got into Erasmus High School at 12. Again, for a little context, this was an achievement. Erasmus High School was a good high school to get into.
Yeah, it was a good high school, and 12 is young for high school.
Absolutely.
Pretty quickly off, he became an editor in the school newspaper and wound up working in the school's publishing office as well, selling advertising for school publications. He negotiated a commission while doing this instead of taking the more typical salary for his work there. He got this and sold advertising to Drake Business Schools, which sold post-secondary clerical education. And eventually, Arthur proposed to Drake Business Schools that they make him the advertising manager. Him, a high schooler. He is like 12 or some shit. He's a middle schooler, kinda.
And he just negotiated how he got paid. Like, he said, don't pay me an hourly rate. Pay me for what I kill. Like Rad Bill said, when he's a middle schooler's age, he is showing a level of tenacity that I've not seen in any of the profiteers that we've examined.
Truly. I think part of this is just a sign of the times, a sign maybe of child labor laws, who knows, but it's pretty compelling. You like this kid in this moment. In this moment right here, this is a 13-year-old boy saying, I've worked too damn hard to not be on the same level as management here.
Exactly. But I have read in Empire Pain and some other places that he was kind of a boob at this point, and he kind of did have that Sigma grind set hustle culture thing going. Like, I think there was one point where he bragged that he hadn't had a day off in 294 days or something like that, which, I mean, that's cringe, but it's also pretty admirable. I mean, I'm not going to take it away from the dude.
True. And also, it's 1925. Like, plenty of people are working all year round, babe. Like, let's not get crazy here.
Very true.
Erasmus, the high school he attended, which preached a great deal on the value of merit and hard work, and had taught and received donations from like a good chunk of the founding fathers, the well-known establishment, issued program cards and curricular paperwork to its 8,000 students. And Art pushed for ads to be sold on the back of them. Further, what if Drake Business School, Arthur thought, paid to get their iconography placed on rulers and gave them to Erasmus students? This is a dumb and cliche idea today, but back then, somehow they hadn't come up with that yet.
It was revolutionary.
It was revolutionary. Yeah, for the 14-year-old or whatever he was at that point.
I imagine the other, like, middle-aged men who were working with this 12-year-old in this advertising firm, who for sure hated him a lot.
For sure. God, I've been thinking about Air Bud a lot lately.
Yes!
And this might be stolen, but you think about the kid on the team that the dog isn't on, where he practiced so much and then got benched.
So the dog could play.
Yeah.
No, that is all of the adult men who got degrees in advertising that Artie Sackler got hired over. But they probably all heard that idea and was like, oh my God, that's so fucking obvious. How did I not think of that?
There's one ad executive who's like, I wrote that. He told me I was helping him with his homework here.
This fuck! He hoodwinked me! Or some other 1920s word.
That sounded very 1920s. Yeah.
It did, didn't it? It's also a dope word. Hoodwinked, bamboozled. Again, phenomenal words. But yeah, so we keep like talking about how great this guy is. But at 12, I mean, kind of solid.
Pretty good work for a 12-year-old. Hell, I'd even give it to him at 14. This is above average for a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
By 15, Art was a key earner in the family. But at this point, he had too much work to manage on his own, so he began delegating some of the work to his brother Mortimer, and when he was old enough, would begin offering work to Raymond as well.
Yeah, less so if I remember correctly. Art thought of both of his brothers as his kid brothers and would refer to them as such well into their adulthood. But if I remember correctly, he kind of saw Raymond as let's give this one a chance to be a kid. Yeah, Mortimer and I are going to grind it out.
We're a couple salty old fucks. Mortimer is 15 at this point. He's going to die any day now.
Exactly. But Raymond was definitely the baby of the family, if
for sure. Arthur got the two siblings of his job selling advertising for the Dutchman, which was the student magazine at Erasmus. So at this point, they've got media at Erasmus cornered, and the two persuaded Chesterfield Cigarettes to advertise to students in the magazine, which made them some decent scratch, actually.
Hey there, Sonny. You want to look cute for Betsy before you ask her out to the dance? Well, just lean against a post and light a Chesterfield cigarette. The second she sees you take a drag, she'll be infatuated, son.
Need to unwind after a long day on the jungle gym? Stressed after a day of relying on your times tables? Sit back and unwind with the all-natural flavors of Chesterfield cigarettes. It's toasted, after all. Good stuff. Erasmus also had an employment office. I don't know how to feel about this. Bad?
Yeah,
Mostly.
bad.
Yeah, not good. Yeah. Art used it to get his hands on any other job he could alongside his advertising jobs. Art delivered newspapers, flowers, and all the other stuff that kids delivered in the mid-20s. When the Depression set in, Art turned 17 and graduated high school. Around that same time, his dad went ahead and lost the family's money as a result of an investment he'd made into tenement properties, which this was like everything he had left.
Yeah, this was the final nail in the coffin, so to speak.
Yeah.
His father was pretty broke at this point.
His father was broke. Yeah. His father gathered the kids, using the words of every single financial planner post on LinkedIn, then told them that they wouldn't be getting any money for college, but for their troubles, he'd worked to give them the gift of a good name.
The most important intangible gift there is.
Yeah, definitely. You're a not famous person, and your dad once owned a grocery store. This is dynamite, yeah. Arthur Sackler took this name of his and attended NYU for pre-med. He had no money, so he had to rely on used books, which is a ridiculous sentence in the modern age.
The only reason that he was able to do that is because Pearson wasn't around yet to change the edition every year so that you couldn't buy used books.
Yeah, you could just rely on a book that was like pre-electricity, and you would probably be fine in the world of medicine for the most part. While not studying, Arthur worked on the college newspaper. He really stuck to media hard. He also worked on the humor magazine and the yearbook as well. He waited tables at night and was a soda jerk, whatever that is, between classes at the local candy store, all the while sending money back home and guiding his kid brothers through keeping all the jobs he left for them. When he finally finished undergrad, through a result of all of these extra jobs, he had enough money to purchase a new grocery store for his parents, which included living quarters, actually. Bought the rents a house right out of college.
Right out of college, while going to college. Like,
yeah.
I mean, really, he had made it at this point. A grocery store is a retirement asset. He could just leave the workforce.
Yeah. Yeah, he could just have a grocery store in Brooklyn. I mean, my God, that's pretty sweet.
I would love to be the owner of any property in Brooklyn.
Yeah. I mean, if anyone has a grocery store in Williamsburg that they want to get rid of, you'd be twisting my arm, but I guess I'll take it off your hands.
Yeah.
Anyway, next was medical school, where Art took a full course load and worked for the school's magazine. By most accounts here, Art was a good student and on his way to becoming a caring and by-the-books doctor in a less than excellent system. See, the medical field had come far, but from low beginnings. Like during the 1800s, doctors were perceived as snake oil salesmen mostly.
And mostly because a lot of them were. I mean, we have to remember when this was in history. This is the 1930s. I mean, penicillin had just been invented a couple years before. And the 1800s, Art probably knew people that were alive for most of the 1800s. I mean, the 1800s were like 30 years ago.
It's not that long ago. Yeah, and by the way, the weird snake oil salesmen in the grand scheme of things in 1800s medicine, they're the good ones. In many cases, a doctor in that day and age was someone who took a person who was pretty sick and just killed them.
Just fucking murdered them.
Yeah, and made a real mess of it too. Like, I tried, like breaking up his head or whatever, and that didn't help his cough, but he's dead, so I guess heaven or whatever. When Art was in medical school, medicine was supposedly in a golden age, thanks to medicine beginning to kind of work and all of the credibility for doctors that followed. Then, like now, a ton of immigrants made their way to the U.S. with a dream of raising their children to be doctors. And Arthur Sackler was no different here. Art knew when he was 4 that he was going to be a doctor.
And Sophie was pressuring him the whole time. This was Arthur's trajectory for sure. I think he was kind of going above and beyond with all of the other stuff he was doing on the side, though.
Yeah, he really, at this point, I'd almost call the doctor part kind of a side hustle.
Right?
Yeah.
He side hustled medical school.
Yeah, he did. It was a side gig. Isn't that wild? So, in a further testament to the state of things at the time, while Art was at medical school, he spent a great deal of time working with a once talented surgeon, whatever that means, whose abilities had deteriorated with age to such a degree that students in the program took to calling him the Angel of Death. And he was just allowed to keep working there. But one day, did you have something to say?
No, I was just gasping.
I was wondering if that's what that was.
Yeah, that was just a gasp.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's appropriate. One day, after the Angel of Death wobbled away from a patient on whom he intended to operate for a non-urgent matter, Art snuck up and told the patient to not get the operation, but he wouldn't say why. Telling them that the doctor was a wobbly old fuck, notorious for killing patients, risked slowing Art's medical career, and Art didn't want to be outside selling apples between shifts like so many doctors were during the Depression. Thus, Art didn't. He didn't say anything. He didn't elaborate, and the patient wound up getting the operation and died as a result.
And when I first heard this story in Empire of Pain, the author made a point to highlight the fact that this bothered Arthur.
Yep.
This weighed heavy on his conscience. And when I first heard the story, my impression was, all right, well, this guy clearly has some semblance of a conscience because he felt bad about this injustice as he viewed it. But the more I think about it, I have to remember he did feel bad and he did recognize injustice, but he could have told this patient, don't do this, this doctor isn't competent, and risked his livelihood for the life of the patient. And the fact of the matter is, he didn't do that.
He didn't do that. He went home and, in essence, was like, God, I feel so bad. This lady was going to get murdered, and I just let the murderer do it, and now she's dead. Isn't that the worst?
Yeah, which, I recognize the fact, without minimizing it, that people live and learn, and I'm not going to take away the benefit of the doubt that Arthur did learn from this experience, but it still does show that when given the choice between risking somebody's life and risking his career, he chose his career. And regret does not absolve guilt.
Not in the event of a wrongful death, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a complex part of the story that, candidly, I've kind of been chewing on for the past however long.
It is tough. I think up to this point, Arthur Sackler is a fairly good-natured person.
Seemingly.
By all accounts, seemingly so. And what this represented was someone going for a dream who had ambitions of saving lives, taking the first step over to the dark side, compromising. And we see this a ton. These young hopefuls who kind of sacrifice their soul piece by piece to hopefully one day get to a point where they can make a big difference. But by the time they get there, they're kind of already gone, right? Yes. They've kind of given everything about them, everything about the original mission away for the sake of profit. A weirdly common story. But towards the tail end of Art's stint in medical school, he got a job as a copywriter for a German pharmaceutical firm called Shearing. His time with Shearing in the Depression gave him the jolt he needed to consider maintaining just some sort of business career or something on the side. And he would eventually wind up coming on as a researcher for Shearing and work in their advertising department as well. Despite this hedge, art did press forward in the medical profession, and in 1944 wound up at the Creedmoor Asylum. You see, years ago, rather than casting them onto our streets, part of what we paid in taxes would go towards quietly neglecting the mentally incapacitated in operations like the 300-acre, 70-building complex in Queens. We joked about the seeming lack of oversight in medicine and how that guy was jokingly allowed to just kind of meander around and kill patients, but nowhere was the savagery of medicine in the 40s more evident than in American asylums.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They were like, well, we told them to knock it off, but they were still crazy. So maybe we could move the needle by just beating the shit out of them and torturing them to death.
Yeah, which was common, actually. And trigger warning, the worst example our primary source cites is an asylum in New Jersey where patients' teeth, gallbladders, ovaries, and like a whole bunch of other stuff were removed in an effort to alleviate their symptoms. I guess the crazy was in their teeth or something. None of these treatments brought on relief, but they did kill over 100 people. So, that's something. It's not something. It's just bad. It's
just bad. Yeah, it's just bad.
Just a fucking nightmare. Anyways, to keep patients in Creedmoor at bay, asylum staff would administer a host of treatments, civil by comparison to this, like sterilization, lobotomies, and of course, shock therapy. Now, Arthur Sackler, who was soon joined by his brothers at Creedmoor, apparently administered shock therapy to thousands of patients, which, yeah, if we ignore his apparent enthusiasm for the practice, just kidding, he fucking hated doing this, you could see that he was working towards something with it. He took it upon himself to study why shock therapy worked, and bizarrely, it did work for some. Like, it was a brutal but effective treatment.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, electrocompulsive therapy, which is essentially just shock therapy, it is still used in extreme cases today in a much more humane way.
It's far more moderated. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like, well, for example, patients now are under general anesthesia. Then they were just electrocuted.
Yeah, then it was like on a light switch or a giant cinematic Frankensteinian lever thing.
Yeah, it was like, let's do the electric chair, but only like 75% of the way.
Yeah, right. Let's turn it on low for this batch.
Yeah, once you see the blood vessels exploding in their eyes, then you turn it off. That was dark. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Arthur and his brothers hooked a rabbit up to test this, to see why it worked. Arthur and his brothers hooked a rabbit up to what I'm imagining as like a tiny little rabbit electric chair and administered the treatment. They saw blood swell in the ear on which treatment was administered, and then saw, in short order, the other ear on the bunny's head beginning to swell, which suggests a sort of water snake or like toothpaste effect with blood going through the brain or whatever else. And theoretically, the brain is there in the middle, and all of that blood is rushing through the brain, maybe rushing something else through. Arthur et al. Noted that after the shock, histamines proliferated the brain of the rabbit, as a result, perhaps, of that blood sloshing through, as I'm imagining it. From this, they hypothesized that perhaps giving patients a little dose of histamines could bypass the need for shock therapy. And y'all, it fucking worked.
It worked, gang. It fucking worked.
A third of the schizophrenic patients they studied wound up being able to just go home. Rather than getting shocked to pieces, they would now begin each day with a little and extremely debilitating pill. Still a massive improvement.
Yes, absolutely.
The team published over 100 research papers on the topic. In fact, Arthur, now a rich man,
and we'll get to how that happened in a moment,
published a few on his own. Now, I had a joke written about the phrase et al., which I mentioned a few minutes ago, and it's not going to land, so I'm not going to do it. But an important point needs to be addressed here. Et al. Is used when you have more than two other authors, typically, in anything that's submitted to a medical journal. This study was not just Arthur.
Nope.
It was Arthur, his brothers, other staff, surely, and a mentor of Arthur's. He considered him like the greatest disciple of Freud or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, he worshipped this guy.
Yes.
The story we just told is one of immense collaboration that with 4 letters, E-T-A-L, became the story of one man's legacy. Et al. In the field of science is a kingmaker, and that is exactly what it did here.
To Radbill's point, Arthur wasn't even the most senior person in the room.
Yeah.
The most senior person in the room was probably his mentor. But Arthur's name is on the study, and we're trying to remember what his mentor's name was because it wasn't before that at all. Which brings us to chapter 2. Wait, so how did Arthur get rich again?
So actually, the fortune Arthur was relying on to self-publish came from the introduction of a drug that no one these days knows too much about. And this fortune would be rocketed into the stratosphere by a drug that we've all heard of, but I didn't know too much about it until this story. You see, in 1947, 3 years before Arthur et al. Published their work, which would come to be known as the Sackler method, Thorazine was introduced to treat major psychological ailments like schizophrenia. It helped limit the flow of histamines, where the Sackler method helped promote the flow of histamines. So other side of the coin, sort of. It was considered as a miracle drug, but it was also later coined a major tranquilizer.
Yet side effects included dizziness, drowsiness, anxiety, sleep problems, breast swelling or discharge, changes in menstrual periods, weight gain, swelling in hands or feet, dry mouth, stuffy nose, blurred vision, constipation, impotence, or trouble having an orgasm.
Which means you really couldn't take this shit while driving. I can't operate a motor vehicle right now. I just took Thorazine, and it's now almost impossible for me to masturbate, so.
I can't multitask. If there was only a drug that could just make it easier to masturbate while I drive, that would change everything.
And also, my breasts are killing me.
As a result, the pharma innovators observed that these side effects really created a lapse in utility. If they were going to widen the market for this major tranquilizer, these side effects really needed to be addressed as soon as possible.
Correct. Milltown, as a result, was introduced as the first minor tranquilizer, and people fucking loved this shit.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. Finally, you could take a drug and drool and just drag your knuckles through an entire workday. People just ate it up. The manufacturer of Milltown hailed the drug as having no side effects at all. And that was mostly true, but there was one side effect. When ingesting this tranquilizer, one would often wind up feeling tranquilized. It was great at that. It was a pretty potent drug, as it turns out. This wasn't enough to dissuade people, but it wasn't exactly a turn-on. This is a pill you take to put you in a good mood, and a side effect is that it makes you docile and stupid.
Yeah, it was like taking 5 shots at lunch. Taking 5 shots at lunch is just too much. You're going to have a good time, but you're going to get fired.
You're going to get sweaty.
Yeah,
you can't get any work done. I mean,
people are going to know. They needed to figure out a way to get you at the 2 shots or 2 beers at lunch level.
For sure. And what's so funny is, by the way, before Milltown, that was kind of the move. Was like, oh, you're stressed. Well, have you considered getting a little shit-faced with lunch?
Have you considered having 3 martinis at lunch instead of just 1?
Not everything was terrible about this barbaric phase in American medicine. Kind of rocks.
Yeah, I mean, you die at 42, but goddamn, we're here for a good time, not a long time.
So the goalposts were established. Create a new minor tranquilizer that makes the person taking it happy, but doesn't dumb them down. The company Roche was the first one to really hit this slam dunk out of the park with their drug Librium, a tranquilizer for the common man. Muscle spasms?
Excuse me, kind sir, might I recommend a big heaping fistful of Librium?
Night blindness?
Pardon me, my good man, but a bottle of Librium will do right away with that in a jiffy.
Nervousness at parties? Can I have the floor, please? I'd like to raise a glass to the good folks at Roche. for their fantastic product, Librium. I pour a glass of whiskey, take a light of my pipe, and funnel an entire bottle of those little yellow guys, and all my concerns melt away. A toast to Librium. I'm the star of the show, and I'm pretty sure I just took a shit in my clothes. Up to this point, the 1950s, no pharmaceutical product has ever done what Librium did, but that was just up to this point. Roche's next big innovation is one you will have actually heard of.
Remember, gang, this is the 1950s. The Cold War is in full swing, and Roche has just invented a drug that you can be a person while taking, and it relieves stress.
Yep.
Most people in the US in the 1950s were waking up every day to the very real possibility that nuclear war would erupt. That was just the world that they were living in. So the fact that Roche came up with this minor tranquilizer at this time.
Their limousine pulled up at the exact right time.
Precisely.
And, you know, you just made a great point, and I want to, like, drive that home a bit further. Think about what it was to be a grown-ass person in the 50s. If you're a woman, I mean, forget it. Like, it's already just a wash. But if you're a guy in the 50s, let's say you're 40 years old, that means you saw your dad go to war.
Yep.
And then there was a Great Depression.
Yep.
And then there was another war and a blip of relief.
Yep.
Where everyone was like, everything's fine now. And then the US and Russia began pointing nukes at each other for the rest of your fucking life. Despite how we portray it, no one knew what the fuck was happening at this time. It was chaotic and miserable.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, the fact that they came out with a drug that just kind of made you feel good. No one knew what PTSD was. Having something to make you less stressed out, they couldn't have released it at a better time. And
Truly.
What's crazy is Librium went bonkers, but what Roche did next was even crazier.
It was the big thing, and its purpose was similar. So to avoid cannibalizing Librium's incredible consumer base, this product was marketed for different problems and really was a runaway success with the women of 1950s America. Tired of contending with the stresses of rearing children all day and then pulling away to get made up and then making dinner for your husband before he finishes up at the office?
Down a whole bottom of Valium with that skinny martini.
Tired of the under-promising, lonely, sexist world afforded to today's women in corporate America?
Why, a Valium-filled bathroom break should loosen those back and neck muscles.
Now, Arthur is a psychiatrist at this point, but he had nothing to do with the production of these two drugs, those being Librium and Valium. You see, while he was a full-time psychiatrist, he was working nights and fucking weekends as an advertising executive. And it just so happens Arthur's in the right place, right time, to run the accounts for Librium and for Valium. And like he did in grade school for both of these drugs, he negotiated a commission on sales.
Because he had that medical background, when he went into medical advertising, he knew how doctors talked. He knew how doctors thought. So he had an edge on the other advertising executives because he spoke that language. And while he was being a full-time psychiatrist, he became an ad executive, and that venture is ultimately what sent his fortunes through the roof. This is how Arthur Sackler got rich.
It is. Some fine print on an engagement agreement created one of the most consequential fortunes in human history. And at the time, everyone tried getting in on this shit. A Pfizer equivalent tried to compete from a bottom line perspective by marketing a similar product to children. Scared of the monsters under the bed? Nervous about the first day of school? Well, there's a pill for that.
That is so low. And if I remember correctly, you know, this kind of started with Thorazine, But this is the start of the, oh, you have a blank ailment? There's a pill for that.
There's one thing you take for everything now.
But nothing up until this point was killing it like Librium and Valium.
Yeah, that's an interesting choice of words, but we'll get to that. With the kid shit, with everything else, whenever companies like Pfizer, like Sackler's company, whoever else get accused of marketing to kids, and this is confusing, they always get really defensive. It's a big, like, how dare you moment. Like, did you know the drug was bad or didn't you?
Yeah. And as it turns out, with Librium and Valium, they kind of did.
Yeah.
So we mentioned that the advertisements indicated that Librium and Valium had no side effects.
Non-habit forming, as they said.
Yeah, that kind of wasn't true. They were both super fucking addictive.
Yes.
And evidence came out that they knew they were super fucking addictive, and they intentionally buried that.
They buried that shit.
There was a study that some doctor was trying to do. It was like 50 people or something, and 30 of those people ended up being addicted to it. And the person doing the study was like, hey gang, 30 out of 50 people are exhibiting signs of dependency. And Artie Sackler was like, well, no. Pump the brakes. Librium and Valium are just so beneficial that without their daily Librium and Valium, they're reverting to how they were before. And that's why they're breaking out in cold sweats and shitting themselves.
Yeah, the doctor who did it's like, these guys are having a seizure on the floor.
Yeah.
And that's real, by the way. And Arthur Sackler's like, looks like they need a lot more Valium.
Yeah, seriously.
Someone better get these two shaky, foamy sons of bitches some Valium.
And some toilet paper, because they shat themselves.
You're right.
What Pfizer was trying to participate in here was a future addiction epidemic. And as we just kind of joked about, a large amount of fault goes to an advertising campaign that was devised by Arthur Sackler.
Yeah, a huge amount of the blame here goes right to Arthur. He ran these accounts. And, you know, in talks retroactively, Arthur Sackler did show some remorse. But again, I think somewhere in his mind, this is the price of greatness. Art talked about these drugs destroying people's lives in an incidental sort of, well, let's look at the bright side kind of way among his peers. I think at one point he did sort of tacitly admit, like, yeah, well, you know, these drugs, they did make junkies of some people, but they did a lot of good on the way up.
And he also did a lot of victim blaming.
Tons of
those
victim
people
blaming.
had addictive personalities. They were going to get addicted to something anyway. I might as well make a profit from it. He didn't say the last part.
You're going to hear a lot of this kind of shit.
Yeah!
So since terramycin, an antibiotic procured and patented by a little-known company called Pfizer at the time, which, by the way, Arthur made Pfizer a household name. He was huge in medical advertising. Since terramycin, Arthur had become the go-to for medical advertising on weekends and evenings. He was hired by the namesake William McAdams of the advertising firm William Douglas McAdams after William's first major success, cod liver oil. And eventually, Arthur would come to just buy the whole company from William, neglecting to change the name, which is a calculated decision, no doubt. Secrecy, Arthur reasoned, was vital to his fortune.
Absolutely. So let's just take a quick beat here and take inventory of the current workload of old Artie Sackler. During the day, he is still a resident psychiatrist at a full-fledged asylum where, on top of his normal rounds, he is participating in studies to further progress in the field. Then, he is also moonlighting as the executive and then owner of one of the most prestigious medical advertising agencies on the planet. And then, When he finally does get the opportunity to come home, he is going to begin splitting his time between two families because he begins cheating on his wife with another woman. We'll get more into that relationship in the next episode because there's just not enough room in this one. But Jesus Christ, is this motherfucker busy.
So busy. And to do all that and keep it a secret. If I was doing half of that stuff and just had one family, you'd never hear me shut the hell up about it.
I can't shut up when I buy someone a Christmas present.
Yeah. Jesus. Around work and that trip to the bank, and then I had to get gas. My God, my whole day was ruined.
Yeah, dude, it's fucking crazy. He's ruining the world as he goes, but he just finds so many hours.
How does he do that? But yeah, so that's one of the big things, I think, with Arthur Sackler's story, and one of the big problems with secrecy in business like this in general, especially around medicine. That shit's a problem.
Oh.
The fact that he can bury the lead that much to where plenty of the people looking to McAdams don't implicitly know Arthur Sackler's at the helm is an issue.
Oh, yeah, for sure. His intentionality here is crazy to look at. But we do have to remember that all of the books and works that we've read on Arthur Sackler are all, in retrospect. Yeah. So there is a possibility that he had no idea what he was doing at the time.
Totally.
And was absolutely wrung dry with stress on a daily basis. And we just assume that he handled it all cool and collected. So yeah. I think that this might have been a symptom of him just not being able to say no to things and being miserable all the time. And the shitty part is that's kind of how I hope it went. Like, I hope he was miserable the whole time.
I hope this sucked for him.
Yeah, I am so not rooting for his happiness. It is. It's pretty shitty of me.
Yeah.
But anyway, I will offer one more observation from all of our studies of these bastards. If your parents aren't millionaires, you're never going to be a billionaire. Billionaires only grow when planted in rich, pun intended, soil. See our entire back catalog.
Yes.
However, if you want to make a few million, the best thing you can do is get really good at making mentors.
Yep. That's fucking it. And I think that was actually vital to this too. That's how Arthur bought companies and didn't make headlines. He silently bought them from mentors. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, and I do think that there was intentionality there, and I think that he was playing on the pride of other men. He was like, this guy wants his name on the building more than me, and he's willing to give up something to get that. So I'm going to take advantage of that and keep my business to myself. It's kind of like when Tony Soprano makes Junior Soprano the head of the Soprano family, but we know that Tony's running the whole thing.
As it goes, he's the hat and not the head.
Yeah. Well said. Yes.
Yeah. So William was the very first to market a product. This is William McAdams, was the very first to market a product to doctors instead of consumers. But with terramycin, Arthur changed the fucking game. I just described the runaway success before this of cod liver oil, and your internal monologue went, no fucking shit. But I think we can all agree that there isn't a lot in the way of a product that is less sexy than cod liver oil, or any medical innovation at the time for that matter. It's cod liver oil and then Thorazine.
Is your dick working too well? Are you stressed out about how well your dick works? Are your breasts not swollen enough and leaking whatever fluid that is? Try Thorazine, because your dick won't work, but you won't care.
That was the part that Arthur sought to change for his specific audience, and I think it fucking worked. Oh. Terramycin, the first product Arthur advertised after taking ownership of McAdams, was what he called a broad-spectrum antibiotic. He coined that term. It's the antibiotic for everything. That is an advertising term. The only thing that made it special was that no one else had ever said, take this antibiotic for everything, I guess. In Arthur's day and age, where would you hear this? Why, from your doctor, of course. But that was because the detail men, as Arthur called them, would visit doctors and do what they could to compel the doctors to prescribe their drugs to you. A sort of pharmaceutical salesman, if you will. This is the first time that happened. Yeah. Pharmaceutical salesmen were invented by Arthur Sackler. So
yes.
He's got that notch on his belt. Yeah, thanks, dude. That really worked out great.
Yeah, that made everything better for everyone.
Yep. Detail men employed by McAdams, by the way, would number in the thousands after the launch of Roche's 2 tranquilizers. While they met doctors for lunch and golf, the McAdams office would hum along with other efforts. A surprisingly diverse little bubble in the mid-20th century.
Yeah, because at first glance, Arthur seemed kind of progressive because he hired Jews and black people and communists. Again, on his face, it's a gracious and egalitarian gesture.
You're looking at it and going, maybe there's still some good left in that guy.
Gesture. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I got that. But it gets way more sinister when you read between the lines because he would hire Jewish employees at a below market rate.
Yep.
And then when they inevitably came and asked for a raise, Arthur would start asking really cool guy questions like, oh, are they paying Jews more somewhere else? Yeah. And again, Arthur Sackler is Jewish.
This is bleak, man.
Yeah.
Inspired from his days of giving out branded school supplies at Erasmus, another big invention of Arthur's was compelling Eli Lilly to give out branded supplies to students at med schools, and this kicked off a huge wave of this shit. Now, a common refrain that is offered frequently, and one that irritates me to no end, is this. Doctors would never be seduced into believing false advertising.
It's more than just a common refrain. It was a legal defense. It has been a legal defense multiple times. So, their whole legal team hinged on this refrain.
It feels like such a, come on, man.
Yeah.
It seems to go right in hand with the supplier side blaming the consumer side for misusing their terrible and dangerous products. And it ignores the fact that a ton of these advertisements, when not communicated in person by detail men, were issued in medical journals, delivered on a weekly basis, free of charge to doctors across the nation, and to the untrained eye, even the medically trained one. This felt fiduciary. There was no telling that these ads were fake. They looked like case studies.
This is another thing that I'm not sure if Arthur Sackler directly invented it, but was brand new at this time. So, when you start reading an article either online or in a magazine, if you're 1,000, and you start thinking, wow, this journalist is really jazzed about some product. And then you realize halfway through, or you see some little, fine print thing somewhere where you're like, oh, I've been reading an ad that looked like a article for the past 5 minutes. That didn't exist yet.
Yeah. And I think Arthur was instrumental in the advent of that as well.
Yeah. So in these medical journals, not only were these advertisements present that doctors were reading, but they also didn't look like advertisements. So it was nefarious as fuck. I mean, he knew exactly what he was doing. And on a lot of these ads, they would have doctor endorsements with the name and the address of the doctors that endorsed whatever it was. The doctors didn't fucking exist. It was all bullshit.
Yeah, this whole thing, the doctor wouldn't buy into some bullshit ad. They might be right, but as such, McAdams was designing ads to not look like ads at all. That was the whole thing. They wouldn't believe an ad. They would believe another doctor, though.
Exactly. So this leads us to chapter 3. Everyone gasps at the size of Arthur's huge machine.
You nailed that. That was perfect.
Thanks.
The same assurance, as it turns out, was uttered by a Mr. Henry Welch, a fixture of the mid-century pharmaceutical scene. He co-published a few medical journals, in fact, when he wasn't giving speeches or selecting antibiotics at his primary post, as the top antibiotics regulator at the FDA. These two career decisions, at first glance, suggest a hair of impropriety, and you'd be forgiven for suggesting that because after an expose was released on some false advertising in the field, the journalist who authored the piece received dozens of letters from doctors suggesting that Henry Welch was indeed corrupt. As an aside, and really to drive the cartoonish nature of this home, Henry Welch at one point used his position at the FDA to compel underlings at the agency to dig a pool in his backyard.
Yeah, like, this is a long way from Bonneville, and we're kind of circling back to our Air Bud example from earlier. Like, this is the guy that Air Bud wouldn't come to at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Yes, I've seen Air Bud, and yes, I obviously remember how it ends. Also,
And yeah, I cried.
it's adorable, but something that we should mention. So, in response to these accusations that Welsh was using his position in the FDA and his position being an editor on these medical journals as a conflict of interest, he said that he was given, what was it?
A modest honorarium.
A modest honorarium. He said, oh yeah, I'm on these journals too because I like being on journals, but I'm not receiving any money for it.
Yes. A likely story, Henry.
Indeed.
Yeah. Nonetheless, this was an excellent fucking lead. If John Lear, the writer, wanted to investigate the influence of business interests on medicine, this was something to follow up on, so he decided to check it out. He went down to Washington to meet with Henry Welch, who assured him that the sources Lear used to write his piece on the overprescription of antibiotics were misguided. Besides, Welch assured him, doctors aren't foolish enough to be swayed by some ad.
There it is again.
It keeps coming up. Lear shifted the line of questioning to the two medical journals that Welch worked on. Sources told him that Welch was making a considerable amount from the two pieces. This allegation pissed Welch off and largely ended the interview. There was this one other thing that Welch said at an event about a new wave of antibiotics, and the line was immediately quoted in Pfizer ads. Basically, in front of over 1,000 people, Henry Welch, a regulator, had hailed the third era of antibiotics, and in no time, the quote was accompanying ads for Signamicet. Ads for this drug inspired Lear's curiosity in the field to begin with, by the way, because they came with the endorsement of a bunch of doctors who, in effect, just didn't exist.
Do we really think that 9 out of 10 dentists spend a lot of time existing when they aren't recommending the tremendous efficacy of Sensodyne, enamel strengthening toothpaste?
Yeah, probably fucking not. This was the first thing that I read where I was like, fuck me, do those, like...
Has anyone called those dentists?
I want a list, motherfucker. There are a billion jokes out there like, oh, who are these dentists? But what if they're just not real at all? Like, they're just made up.
Yeah, they could be.
They could be. Lear's next stop was the office of Estes Kefauver, a congressman who headed a trust-busting subcommittee and just loved a good fucking mystery. I like this guy.
Yeah, I liked the guy too. He was an interesting little hero.
He was an interesting hero. In response to Lear's input and what Lear had observed so far, Kefauver launched an investigation that pretty much encompassed the entire pharmaceutical industry. And he worked pretty damn close with John Lear while doing it. Before long, Henry Welch was summoned to take the stand and had a real-ass heart attack to get out of it. I think the heart attack was incidental and convenient, we'll say. But this would... No one fucks around and has a heart attack to get out of a legal obligation.
He's pulling a John McAfee, just having heart attacks to dodge the police. The fuzz is coming. Better pretend I'm dead. God, I love that episode.
That was a good series. This would have been quite the obstacle, though, were it not for the testimony of others and the power of the subpoena. Kefauver's theory was that the pharmaceutical business was buying off the apparatus arranged to police it, and oh boy, did he find some supporting evidence for this theory. Remember the line we just mentioned Welch delivering to that huge crowd that Pfizer quickly adopted? Through testimony, Kefauver proved that this line was written by Pfizer for that speech.
Yeah, things weren't looking very good for Welch.
This does not bode well for our guy, Henry Welch. Bad luck, Henry. Through subpoenaed materials, the subcommittee learned also that the modest honorarium Henry Welch was receiving from the medical journals was actually a 7.5% commission on all ad revenue and 50% of all reprints, which added on average $41,000 to his already pretty decent at the time $17,500 salary from Uncle Sam.
Yeah, and if that wasn't fucked up enough, remember that speech that Pfizer wrote for Welch, the whole third era of antibiotics thing? Well, turns out Pfizer ordered 200,000 reprints of that speech from Welch's publishing company, MD Publishing, which, as Radbill just mentioned, Welch directly got paid from. So, to put it all another way, it was pretty obvious to all parties present that this was just a regular old run-of-the-mill bribe.
Just big ol' stupid bribery. Ibanez, Welch's partner in MD Publishing, wasn't able to appear in front of the subcommittee because of a vicious case of glaucoma. But no matter, the subcommittee was able to determine through the tracking of mail, among other methods of surveillance, that there was a third silent partner in the medical journal, none other than Arthur Sackler.
Yeah, you're probably wondering, okay, that's nice, but what the fuck does Arthur Sackler have to do with this? But
he basically invented it. He's been doing it for years.
Yeah, Arthur was a major stakeholder in MD Publications. So the committee kept seeing this name, Sackler, pop up in all this communication that they were subpoenaing. They were like, well, we got to get this boy in here. And when they started digging into Sackler, the web that they uncovered.
Astounding. While Arthur was neglecting his families, working at Creedmoor and moonlighting as the owner of the incredibly prosperous William Douglas McAdams ad agency, he'd found time to open a laboratory for psychobiologic studies on the grounds of Creedmoor. He became editor of the Journal of Clinical and Experimental Biology. He started a medical publishing company, launched a news service for physicians, became the president of the Medical Radio and Television Institute, which did around-the-clock radio service and was sponsored by pharma companies. And he opened a laboratory for psychiatric research at the Brooklyn College of Research. These were the endeavors Arthur founded and commanded. He's president, basically, of everything I just said.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He's the head dude.
He's not like working for somebody on the side. These are institutions that would bear his name if they didn't bear somebody else's.
He invented it, basically. He's been doing it for years.
Exactly.
When the subcommittee began digging, they found that from Arthur's office in Midtown, he was running at least 20 different enterprises, and most of which, the ones that didn't show up in the list we just read off, he was a silent partner. He buried the lead of his involvement in those institutions. Looking at the picture, they were now able to see a member of his committee quipped that, and this is a direct quote from the book Empire of Pain,
the Sacklers could develop a drug, have it clinically tested, secure favorable reports from doctors and hospitals where they had connections, devise an advertising campaign, publish the clinical articles and the advertisements in their own medical journal, and use their PR muscle to place articles in newspapers and magazines, many of which were laden with falsities, and unless you were told, you probably wouldn't even know they were ads.
Yeah. Arthur Sackler would soon be on the Forbes 400 list, and he got there by putting his hands in everything. As the committee's understanding of his vast reach developed further, it only became more daunting. In this moment in time, Arthur ran the biggest medical advertising agency in the whole world. If pharmaceutical companies wanted to avoid his involvement, perhaps because they don't want to be associated with the fraudulent ads that Arthur ran, the only real choice for them is the L.W. Froelich Agency, which fortunately does maintain a similar stature to McAdams. But wait a minute, Arthur Sackler is also a silent partner and major shareholder in that firm as well. Arthur has a full horizontal And where he's strongest, he basically has the market completely cornered. By the way, Bill Froelich of L.W. Froelich was subpoenaed but was unable to appear because of a trip to Europe. He decided to suddenly take in a serious case of glaucoma. Nonetheless, the committee had Arthur stateside, and he didn't contract any glaucoma from the subpoena. So that's good. As a result, Arthur's summoned. The last time he was on Capitol Hill, he kind of got his ass handed to him. 10 years prior, Arthur was shot down by an anti-Semitic senator while asking for research funding.
You don't get rich by being a good guy.
You just don't. But now it was his success that compelled the visit. It was his false advertisements, his silent partnerships, and his instrumental role in getting the nation addicted to two extremely dangerous drugs, Valium and Librium.
And keep in mind, looking at what this subcommittee had on Arthur, it looked pretty bad. They had letters between him and Welsh where Arthur was like, hey, Welsh, I know things aren't going well for you because you're taking the fall for all this shit. I got you. And other pieces of communication that really could have been viewed as damning.
Oh, they would have buried his ass.
Yes.
This time, though, Arthur came armed with a brilliant legal team who negotiated a strict time allotment and a strategy. Come in, answer the questions you want to answer. Deviate to answer the easy stuff. Who's on the staff? How some drugs are made. Maybe downplay your influence where possible. And when the committee begins unholstering the big guns, run down the clock and give this committee a piece of your mind while you do it. And that's what Arthur did. Slowly, assertively, and eloquently, he talked. Aside from a few questions about how some drugs were made, throughout his testimony, he was interrupted only twice. Once by Kefauver, who he calmly addressed with the following statement, and I'm quoting here from the book. Senator Kefauver, can I proceed simply because I believe that my testimony will clarify things so that there may be no need for further questions. And once by another member of the subcommittee to whom Arthur rebutted, we're coming to that in a moment, Senator. Arthur maintained such complete control of the subcommittee that the series of incriminating letters between Henry Welch and Arthur Sackler that Money Mike just mentioned, they just never fucking came up.
Nope.
They were never raised, and Arthur walked free. As he walked out the door, Arthur, mind you, still a free man, turned to Estes Kefauver and thanked him for the opportunity to state his case. The record speaks for itself, he said, and walked out a free man.
And that is where we will pick up next time. Thanks so much for listening, everybody.
Thank
don't forget
you.
to like, comment, and subscribe.
Yeah, give us those clicks. Give us them subscriptions. Yeah, just let us have it. I feel like we really earned it with this one.
Yeah,
send us a comment too.
We worked hard. I read a book.
Me too. I also read a book.
We read a book for this. And by read a book, I mean listen to an audio book.
I was worried at times, like Patrick Raddenkeefe is such a fucking dreamboat. He's who wrote the book. I was worried at times I was sounding a little like him, which I wanted to avoid. But yeah, no, it's a great book. But yeah, we read a whole book for you guys. If you have comments, definitely shoot them to our subreddit, r/Profiteers versus the People. That and our email will be down there. Drop us a line if you have any questions, requests, that kind of thing. And thank you again for listening. We love you, and goodbye.